so far removed from the idea of America and its minarchism written in the United States Constitution, where we have to bring her back to where she belongs. Thank you for listening to this episode of Chasing Life, Liberty, and Minarchy. Good evening and welcome, minarchists, libertarians, and conservatives alike, to this episode of Chasing Life, Liberty, and Minarchy. I am your host, Roderick Threets, the minarchist, with the most to say about minimalization of government and the expansion of liberty. I'm going to go out on a limb and says no one does it better than I do. That might sound arrogant to a few people. Those of you that know me know that's not an arrogant statement. I just don't. I'm going to take the crown on that. Because one, people don't understand what minarchy is, and it's always confused with monarchy. It's confused with everything else but what it actually says and means. And we're here. I know my conservative friends, we talk about minimal government, small government all the time. And I see more and more conservatives starting to become more minarchist, not necessarily libertarian, even though minarchy is as a lot of mainstream libertarians say, is a fringe radical part of libertarianism. I see nothing radical with the minimal government and the people administering justice amongst themselves, is still having a state involved in that, right? To mediate, right? More and more and more, I see more of my conservative friends understanding to get the minimal government, you got to get away from the bit of statism that's attached to conservatism. And even I was taught the same way before I arrived at minarchy, right? I was taught the same things. But to understand that an expansive bureaucratic state doesn't help anybody, and you see it in real time, what's the answer? Continue feeding the giant monster called the bureaucracy, called the government expansion, called federal overreach, called state government overreach, even local government overreach. Do we keep feeding the monster, or do we start starving that monster out? And we've talked about that in the previous 4 series that I've done on minarchy. We've talked about how to starve out the bureaucracy. We've talked about how we expand liberty and how we should only use the state to mediate our differences or breach of contract, right? This is where we should be. But we will get there. We will get there one way or another. We will get there. It may not be in my lifetime. It may be in our kids' lifetime if we keep pushing and not allowing the narratives to control us, right? I mean, I do want to touch on one issue, though, before we get into our topic. We talk about, as a country, right, as a whole, right, one side's pointing to the other side that they're Nazis and all this stuff, right? But let's remember one thing. United States did stay out of World War II. We have to keep this in mind, right? People tend to forget we were not even in World War II. We weren't even fighting Hitler. That was a whole nother front, right? United States stayed out of it, right? People tend to forget that Pearl Harbor was the reason we got dragged into World War II. And what did we do? We stormed the beaches of Normandy to stop a ferocious and vicious fascist dictator, authoritarian from killing people that he didn't like. People he quarantined. I want people to understand this as we're looking at the current landscape with Iran, right? Hitler got by with killing 6 million people, and the world didn't bat an eye. We learned a lesson from that, didn't we? If we allow authoritarian dictators to continue on their carnage of people because of a different ideology, skin tone, or religion, it turns into 6 million. And we talk about this all the time, never again. That never again expands to human nature and all people from around the world. Never again should we allow a dictator to kill its people because they're opposition. We should never back down from that. Now, I know some people will say, Rod, aren't you, you're against interventionism? Yeah, I'm against it. But when you have someone that are aggressing upon helpless people, somebody has a duty to do it, and Europe sat on their hands, didn't say shit. Putin sat on his hands and didn't say shit. The whole world sat there and watched 35,000 people get killed by a dictator, and no one batted an eyelash. But you know who did learn from history? Donald Trump did, didn't he? Not a single boot on the ground. This Islamic Hitler, they called the Ayatollah, Khomeini, was also killed during this debacle, cutting the head of the snake. Because I guarantee you, he would have continued to stay in power. He would have killed more of his people. He would have killed more Persians. Because remember, these people that are sitting at the helm of this Islamic Republic of Iran, they're not Persian. These are not Persians. They invaded this land, killed people in this land, overthrew the Shah, and then took control of a country and imposed their Islamic beliefs upon Persians. Persians by default are not Muslim or of Islamic faith. They forced this upon them. That was the first act of aggression. That was the first act of aggression nobody batted an eye to. We just try to cuddle up, right, to the Ayatollah Khomeini in the 80s, Ronald Reagan. We just called it, okay, well, no. I thought we didn't negotiate with terrorists and dictators. Hmm? Hmm? Let's keep that all the way real. Nobody did shit about this Islamic Hitler in a country that don't belong to them. And now I see videos of the women in the streets with their hijabs off and dancing around and laughing and hugging and crying, because that oppressive regime is now out of power. And the same shit happened with Hitler. But people in Europe closed a blind eye to Hitler and let him advance and let him do the atrocities that he did. 6 million people. We weren't going to let Iran get to 1 million people, not even 100,000, because people wanted their freedom, right? And these idiots that are out here in these streets hollering about their rights being trampled on, them, especially the women in Iran, they couldn't show their face or their hair or they'd be stoned to death. And you sitting here in the United States hollering about your rights. Fuck your rights. If you can't recognize that for what that is, fuck your rights. You don't deserve them in the first place. You would rather run around and say, oh, my rights, and not recognize people being oppressed. Especially women. But I thought we're supposed to back on women, right? No, just not those women, right? And these same idiots are sitting out here in these damn streets out here right now, holding up Iranian flags. We shouldn't have bombed them. What if we wouldn't have bombed Hitler? Oh yeah, I'm still throwing that in there. What if we wouldn't have bombed Hitler and drove his ass out? That genocide could have very easily been 20 million. Because people sat around on their hands and protested it. We are in an age where we know history and we see this repeat itself over and over and over again. And you're going to get mad because a couple bombs were dropped to free a people? I thought the United States was about freeing people, expanding freedom, not regime change, but expanding freedom. I mean, hell, George Washington, right? We just talked about Washington a couple weeks ago. George Washington sent the Marines to Northern Africa to stop the Barbary slave trade, didn't he? He freed those people with the Marines. And those of you that are not familiar, I need you to recite the Marine Corps song, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. George Washington did that because he felt compelled to free those people as we were on this soil here, trying to free the people that were here. People got this whole game twisted. They got it so twisted where these people have traded their liberty and the nation's liberty for social justice, because I want to run around with the flag of the opposition thinking I'm doing something. Viva Ukraine! Viva Venezuela! Free Maduro! They should eat menudo if they want to free Maduro. Free Palestine. They got to hold up all these flags of all these people. And when a people get liberated from a 45-year regime that oppressed and killed women at will, and you got the audacity to sit on your ivory tower in a first world country and talk about we shouldn't have bombed them. Y'all can take a whole ass motherfucking seat. And those of you that are sitting here bailing on Donald Trump And you guys know I'm not the biggest Trump fan. I'm just here for I'm here for the ride with it. And what's right is right, and what's wrong is wrong. We call out people when they're wrong, and we praise them when they're right. Because if the president loses, we all lose. Period. So those of y'all backing down and backing away from Trump because no new war. This is not a war. This is what a leftist got you idiots caught up in the game. You're acting just like those leftist fools out here. I thought the people on the right and the conservatives was about freedom. Freedom for all, not for some, but for all. And y'all sit here and got your damn panties wrapped around your dicks. Talking about I'm done with Trump. No. You weren't you're not standing on principle, and that's the problem. And the left has got you off your foundation. The left has got you off of your foundation, and now you're wallowing in squalor with them. They got you where they want you. You don't understand that they've played the mind game on you, conservatives. They've played the mind game. Now they got you. So it's either support oppression like the left does or support freedom. I'm always going to support liberty and freedom no matter who it is, where it is, at all times. Because my foundation can't be moved because I'm grounded in my principles. Let's not also remember, right? Let's not also remember my conservative friends that are bailing on Trump. Let's remember that these people have been antagonizing us for 20 plus years. The proxy wars in Iraq, the proxy wars in Syria, the proxy wars in Saudi Arabia with the Yemeni people. Like Iran sat right there and sponsored the famine in Yemen through the Houthi rebels. Are y'all forgetting the shit, the missiles and shit they would send and try to shoot down helicopters, U.S. helicopters out of there? Did y'all forget that shit? We supposed to sit back and be bitches? This country was not created by bitches, and it won't be ended by bitches. Let's get that all the way fucking straight. If you a bitch about this, sit in a fucking corner and let the grown-ups do this shit. We ain't got time for bitches. This is where, here's what's funny, right? Here's even where the communists get this shit right. This is crazy for me to say, but this is where they get it right. They have called these conservatives, like these ones here that are bailing on Trump, they're just undercover leftists. They've been calling them that for a long time, and they have a fucking point. They don't understand how controlled by the left they are. They get them just to move off center just that quick. But my liberty and freedom, right? These people have traded. These people have traded liberty for social justice, and we see where this country is going. Because let's be clear, the erosion of our autonomy, our sovereignty, is what's going to put us under. And the evil forces will march their way. They don't even have to literally march on foot. They just keep inserting propaganda into the social media. fucking your brains up. Maybe I shouldn't have said that word, but old heads like Mark Levin will say, all that cursing, fuck that. I never been nice, never claimed to be nice. And I'm not trying to broadcast to a big, great audience, just the audience that wants to listen. That's it. Because some people that are from the street and all that have a thing to say. And it's real speaking, it's common sense. And some people like that. But this erosion of our autonomy is important, and we need to. I need to talk through this with y'all, so you understand where we are. If those of you have watched the video with Yuri Bezmenov and his and he talked about ideological subversion warfare, you should go watch it. I think I can post it on a Patreon. I think. If you have it, it's a couple hours long. You're gonna need a little bit of time to do that. Right? But we got to talk about this a minute, right? Because these social justice warriors are destroying liberty. They're destroying the country at a whim. And we cannot allow these indoctrinated idiots to take over our states, our local municipalities, and eventually the country. We have to stop them where they breed, and it's going to be local. And I'm not saying we put handcuffs on them or all that, but we need to stop the thought process, and it starts with us. Now let's talk about the historical arc of Western philosophy a second, right? Because it has reached a critical juncture where foundational prioritization of individual liberty is being systematically superseded by the imperatives of social justice, right? This, as I would call this conceptual displacement, represents more than a mere shift in policy. It actually constitutes a fundamental reconfiguration of the social contract and the ontological status of the citizen within the state, right? Because for centuries, the liberal tradition emphasized negative liberty, which is the absence of external constraints, right? As a primary safeguard against tyranny. But however, the contemporary era is characterized by the ascendancy of positive liberty and distribution of egalitarianism and frameworks that necessitate an expansive administrative state to engineer equitable outcomes across diverse demographic strata, right? The perception of the trade, okay, of liberty for social justice, right, is evident in the redefinition of rights or the expansion of bureaucratic oversight, right? And also this emergence of this new legal and sociological consensus that prioritizes collectivism over individual autonomy, right? Now, let me throw you in here a second, right? To to uh to understand the contemporary displacement of liberty, one must first establish the parameters of the classical liberal tradition, right? Classical liberalism, um, as we can identify it through either English or Anglican liberty, right, emerged as the response to centralized authority and control of monarchs and churches, right? which hence advocates for individual autonomy, limited government, and the rule of law, right? This tradition has always posits that individuals are rational actors capable of making decisions in their own best interest without the guiding hand of a central authority. I mean, everybody would like that, right? Right? Remember, that this philosophy is based on negative liberty, right? A freedom, right, from external impediments or coercion, right? Particularly, right, from the state, right? Particularly from the state, the government apparatus, the government arm, whatever, the bureaucratic state or the administrative state, whatever you want to call it, regulatory state, whatever you want to call it, any of those, right? But within that framework, right, people have to understand that rights are inherently negative, and they stipulate what the government and individuals are forbidden from doing to the person, such as interfering with property, speech, or voluntary economic exchange, right? Now, if we think about the classical model, we think about uh, uh, John Locke and Montesquieu and Thomas Paine, right? When we look at this classical model, it views society through a economic lens, right? Conceptualizing it as a marketplace per se, right? Where self-reliant individuals would actually interact to maximize utility, right? So if you can imagine this market of society, right? All of us bartering and trading amongst ourselves, right? Assumes that in a free environment, both labor and capital receives their greatest reward, and the production, right, is efficiently organized to meet customer demand. All right. And the state's role in that is strictly limited to that of what we've talked about, minarchy, or the night watchman, right? Which is actually tasked with the protection of property rights, the enforcement of contracts, and the maintenance of order. That's their job, right? I mean, even John Madison, geez, James Madison. God, I can't get the names together today. Um, and many people like him argued for the constitutional republic precisely because they feared that a pure democracy governed by the common passion or interest of a majority would lead to the sacrifice of individual property rights and the rule of law. And they're right. Right? The simple majority rules over everybody. There's no minority rights in this case, right? Now, I wonder if I could throw this on the screen real quick. I probably can, so I can kind of show you um where I'm going here with this. I got a couple of visual aids here. Let's see if I can make them work. Okay. Let's go. All right, see if it'll let me upload this. Cross your fingers for me. I didn't realize I needed to upload it that way. It would just play while I was speaking. But here we are. Is that, would that be too small or too big? Perfect. I got it on the screen. Perfect. So when we're talking about, right, liberalism, right, we have to look at it from from two sides, right? We have to look at it from the classical or as what's called Anglican liberty, and we have to look at it from the Gallican side, right, or which is social liberty or social justice. Now, A lot of you may not have heard of Gallican liberty, right? But um, I'll explain it this way without getting into the nuts and bolts of it, right? So Gallican liberty, right, comes from Gallicanism, which was a set of religious and political beliefs in France, primarily through the 14th and 19th centuries, right? Um, that sought to limit the power of the Pope over the Gallican Church, right? Now, meanwhile, remember all Protestant church is fighting the Catholic Church, etc. Right? We remember during this time, right? Even though Gallicans remained actually, if I remember, they did stay Catholic. They argued, right, that the French monarch and the French bishops held certain liberties or rights that the Vatican could not infringe upon, right? So we're talking about with the Gallicans, the the push for the national church autonomy, right? Versus God, what's that? What's I know what word I'm looking for. Ultramontanism. That's what I'm looking for, right? Which is ultramontanism is actually the belief that absolute authority rests with the Pope beyond the mountains of Rome, right? So, in other words, what they're saying is the Pope's power in the church, right, expands, let's say, it expands across the globe instead of each church being national. But I don't want to get too far into that, right? But if you're interested in that, right, read about the Great Schism in 1054, right? The Great Schism of 1054, right? And you'll understand where this comes from, the difference between Eastern Orthodox and how they believe the Bible and the Western Church. That's part of that, the Gallican liberty thing, et cetera, et cetera. So I am not going to run you through that. If you're interested in that, you can let me know on Patreon, whatever, and I can do, I can do a piece on it for clarification. But back to our prompt here, right? So you see the two different types of liberalism that's being displayed, right? So we know that the core objective, right, of classical liberalism is individual independence, while Gallican liberty or social liberty is state guaranteed equality, right? Now you'll see the difference where each type, different type, the both types of liberalism, right, uh, deems the nature of rights. Obviously, the classical liberal or the Anglican libertarian sense liberal believes in negative rights as opposed to, right, the social justice, the Gallican liberty, which is all positive rights. Now, remember, positive rights are put on paper and given to you by man. Those are not inherent because they can be taken away at any given time, right? AKA hate speech laws falls under that positive right thing, right? Because it's restricting the negative right, etc. We can get into that too, but you kind of see the contrast, right? Obviously, the classical liberal, no government, less government. Gallican liberals, they believe in enabling and welfare, right? Y'all, you're seeing the trend here, right? You're seeing this, right? I don't want to go through the rest, but you see the difference, right? The people that call themselves liberals today are Gallican or believe in Gallican liberty, and you see that from what you see here, right? The right side, Gallican liberty, is social justice, and classical liberalism is what it is. It says what it says. I'm glad I could explain that. Um, explain that the best I can. Now, Here's where all of this comes together and becomes very interesting, right? Because the divergence between classical liberalism, or as we know it now, let's spread it out. Anglican liberty, right, and Gallican liberty, right, highlights the early seeds of the contemporary conflict on what that liberty looks like, right? While Anglican liberty emphasizes on self-reliance and national guarantees of independence, Gallican liberty seeks freedom through the government, viewing the state not as a potential oppressor, but the primary instrument for achieving social ends, right? I know I'm speaking to the choir when I'm saying this, right? I know I'm speaking to the choir, right? This view by the Gallicans, right, or as we call our social justice warriors, let's call them in modern speak. This view by the social justice warriors is the precursor for this social justice movement we're seeing now, which conceptualized liberty not as the absence of constraints, but the presence of capacities, right, which is provided by the state, not necessarily, and they think it's necessary for human flourishing, right? Mm. Now, let's really talk about this, right? There's another concept of this that I have to bring into the conversation, right? And it's the redefinition of freedom. Okay, the pop and we're going to talk about. Right, I want to get into before we get into it. I want to get into talking about the rise of positive liberty and the enabling nanny state or the welfare state, right? But before we get into that, though, because we'll go there. Make sure you're liking, subscribing, all that good stuff. Please, I love you and thank you. Um, and make sure you share this with all your peeps, not some of them, but all of your peeps. Um, make sure I have this my next thing up here as we talk through this. Um, there we go. So let's as I reflect upon this, as I wrote this earlier in the bullet points that I'm talking off of and trying to remember. Um, this whole shift towards po- positive liberty is very, very scary. Because remember, right? We've talked about this before, right? We've talked about one of my favorite Court justices, Antonin Scalia, when he said, once you start reading rights into the Constitution, you'll start reading rights out of it. This is the dangers of positive liberty. This is the dangers of that, right? Because we went from a period in time in the 1800s that we were more classical liberals than anything to this modern liberalism in the we're talking in the 30s 40s, right? um and this shift was catalyzed by a fundamental redefinition of liberty itself, right? I hope you got your pens out. So I'm going to mention a guy's name. I'm going to talk about a guy here real quick that you might want to look into and to truly understand where this positive liberty comes from, right? But in the late 19 and early 20th century, people like T.H. Green, um, or often called the father of positive liberty, because he argued that true freedom is not merely the absence of interference, but the capacity of doing something worth doing, right? And this freedom to necessitates that the states act to hinder the hindrances to human development, such as poverty, ignorance, and disease. And consequently, the state was transformed from an evil to be limited into a source of virtue and a protector of rights. I want you to think about that a second, right? Because we just dealt with this, didn't we? COVID, right? We just dealt with this going through COVID, right? Oh, the vaccine. Oh my God, the government come out with it. It's the best thing next to sliced bread. Mm-hmm. But this philosophical shift, right, gave birth to the modern welfare state that we see now. SNAP benefits, through the Food Stamp Act, cash assistance on the state level, right? Things of that nature, right? Because this modern welfare state, again, I know I'm preaching to the choir, right, emphasizes social justice and state intervention as necessary components of well-being, right? So in this paradigm, rights are no longer seen as tools to protect the individual from society, but it acts as capacities that society must provide to the individual, these things, because they're perceived as downtrodden, air quotes, right? Now, modern liberals, or um, I don't know what you want to call them, liberal egalitarians, will argue that if an individual is free from the law but lacks the resources to eat or obtain an education, right, their liberty is a hollow abstraction, a form of alienation or false consciousness. And I disagree with that. I think most of us disagree with that, right? Because there was a time, right, where our grandparents, great grandparents got up. No matter how they felt, they went out back in that damn yard or on the back of that farm and they fed them hogs. They fed them cows. They planted their produce. They went out and grabbed their chickens for dinner and wrenched their necks and cut the necks off and boiled them in water so they can pick the feathers off. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Mm? These modern social justice warriors don't get it, because they've had everything given to them digitally or delivered to their house. They never had to go out in the backyard and chase their food down. Because guess what? That's the food is not poisoned, because you raised that food. These kids that run around out here call themselves social justice warriors or whatever you want to call them today. Hmm? No, not food without chemicals in it. Everything they eat is a chemical. From sucking on those little jewel things, right? To eating all this candy that's artificially flavored, to these 12-pack a day soda water drinking fools. Hmm? You want to talk about liberty? The liberty of growing your own food is the ultimate. Because you don't have to depend on no government. You don't have to depend on no grocery store. You don't have to depend on anything but yourself. Self-reliance is the best key to independence. But these people, as we know, they hate liberty, they hate freedom, and they hate independence. Liberty is not a hollow abstraction, as some of them say. It's only hollow if you don't have the skills to take care of yourself. And the schools did that very well. Guarantee you bring some of them churn out of these cities like Orlando, and we happen to drive down a county road in the woods in the forest, and we hit a deer. I guarantee you none of them churn in that truck know how to gut a deer on the side of the road. Hmm? I bet you they run. Ew, ew, oh my God, ew. No, take this damn knife and cut him right down that seam. We just hit him. This food bit. Hmm? We can make deer burgers, deer steak, all that. You better get that knife and cut up that damn seam, boy. Hmm? This is this is what freedom feels like. This is what liberty gives you. Hmm. But ne'er one of them would know how to gut that deer on the side of the road in 15 minutes if they lost depending on it. But I bet you if these kids now, if the whole system shut down, they'd go hungry. Hmm. That is the alienation that I'm talking about, where you don't know how to do for self. Once you get to the point where you lack to do for self, you are alienated. Your being is a mere hollow abstraction because you're useless. But you know how to make a sign and run out in these streets, free Palestine. Don't bomb Maduro. Hmm? You can do all that, but you can't cut up a deer or a moose on the side of the road you just hit so your family can eat for the next 2 to 3 weeks. You can't do that, but you can draw and paint signs for people that don't give a fuck about you. But you know who gives a fuck about you? Your family. Hmm? Your family gives a fuck about you. But when you as a man stop providing, guess who's walking? And let's keep this 100% real. Guess who's walking if you ain't providing? It ain't you walking. That wife and kids of yours you supposed to take care of is walking because you decided to be a social justice warrior. You decided that it was manly of you to hold up signs on the side of the road and create checkpoints in the middle of the road to look for us when you could have been using that time to going out in the woods and shooting for your food and cutting it up yourself and curing it yourself in a smoker. You could have been doing that, but you on the side of the road holding up a pansy ass sign, thinking that's the positive liberty that you're granted and ignoring the negative liberty that was given to you by grace of God. But these people, they depend on the institution of the enabling state to get by so they can hold those signs up on the side of the road, right? Because an enabling state is their cudgel, is their pillow they sleep with at night, that security blanket, right? Because the enabling state was meant that whew, I'm fired up. I'm sorry, people. The enabling state actually meant that the pursuit of equality became a paramount value of government, right? In direct contrast to classical liberalism, right? Because under the enabling state, material inequalities are only justifiable if they serve the interest of the less well off. Huh? Think about it a minute. Why do you think these people treat minorities like they're dumb? They have this thing in their mind that, oh no, we got to help out the brown people because they were in slavery for 400 years. Hmm? You're Mexican and we did so much to your people. Come to our country. We got to do so much for you. I want people to understand that this concept has reordered the priorities of political and economic reorganization, and this transition to to these positive rights or whatever, right, marks the point where the rights of the individual began to be a balance against the frequently traded for rights of the community or the needs of the disadvantaged. Right? What kind of language is that? It's communist language, isn't it? Huh? There was this thinker. His name was John Rawls, and he believed that justice was fairness. And we know justice is not fairness because if justice is fairness, then Lady Liberty is not blind. I'll say that again. If justice if you look at justice as fairness, then Lady Liberty is not blind. Because this social justice stuff is merely a mirage, or a better word, a semantic fraud, right? Because justice is an attribute of human conduct, people, not of social status, right? Because the distribution of wealth in a market is the unintended result of millions of separate actions. It cannot be called unjust anymore than a natural disaster can be called unjust, right? Because the pursuit of social justice destroys the rule of law because it requires the state to treat people unequally through redistribution to achieve an equal outcome. We ain't got much time left, but I want to bring up something in real and live time that just happened. Y'all familiar with the Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard case? Y'all remember that, right? That was the case that challenged race conscious admissions, right? And remember, the petitioner alleged that Harvard and University of North Carolina discriminated against Asian Americans and white applicants in favor of underrepresented minorities. Y'all remember that, right? Y'all remember that case, right? Because remember, the petitioners said that the admissions programs violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, right? And we saw what happened with that case, right? SFFA won that case, right? Because the court found that those programs employed offensive and demeaning assumptions that students of a particular race think alike or bring a unique perspective based solely on their race. It was wrong what those colleges did. At the end of the day, people, I want you to please, 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 please understand this social justice thing, this social justice thing is literally, it's not even communist. It's not even socialist. It's literally authoritarian takeover. It's what it is. We can't call it anything else because around here in these parts, it's up or down, right? You're either downwing for liberty, you're upwing for authoritarianism. There's no left or right. This is social justice is authoritarianism on a whole nother level, and it has creeped its way into our society where people are having to watch how they exercise their rights. I mean, even down to the point where you got people thinking you can't film them in a street. Bitch, you have no expectation of privacy in public. Anything I can see from my eyes, no matter where I am, is public. And the audacity of some of you, well, no, I don't give you consent to photograph. No, fuck that. You you gave consent to get that ID to drive your car, huh? You gave them consent to take your picture for that ID so you can vote, huh? I'm getting sick and tired of and you sheriff's deputies and you police officers that are aiding these people. You should have your badge melted down, slammed down, and you kicked off the force for infringing on someone's First Amendment right, basic First Amendment right, because policy doesn't trump the Constitution of the United States. If I can see it with my eyes, it is public. You got sensitive information on your screen, turn your computer the other damn way. It's not my problem. That person's information is showing out to the public. Not my problem. That's your problem. And we got to get to a point well, we can't back down and not call out these police officers and sheriff's deputies for impeding on people's rights. We got to call them out where they stand. Now, I'm not saying be on the side of the road and do some shit like this, but if you see shit on social media, right, or what have you, you call that shit out for what it is. You can't feel your way around the Constitution. The Constitution is not written in Braille. It says what it says. And you people, they call y'all Karens, Karens and Richards. As you sit here, oh no, he can't photograph. Bitch, I'll take more pictures of you. And I'll take more of you as you walk away, as long as you're on the public sidewalk. Even if you're in your car, I can take a picture because you have no reasonable expectation of privacy in public. Fuck your couch. If you're that upset about people filming you in public, have your shit erased off of Google Maps, ho. Have your shit erased off of Apple Maps, though. If you that worried about your expectation of privacy in public, get all that erased. You can't say you want freedom, but want to tell another man he can't exercise his rights in public. And one more again, at law enforcement, You got to stop allowing these people thinking they are high and mighty by enforcing their feelings. Because what's going to end up happening, people are going to understand this game and they're going to go off your surety bond. And you get too much against you, get sued against your bond too much, you will become unbondable and you will no longer be able to work in law enforcement. Because you're no longer bondable. Our country, we're at a crossroads where it comes to this social justice and our individual liberty. We got to fight every single day. I don't even say fight, shut down. Like, don't even give them, because remember, social media, whatever, it don't matter. I don't have to listen to you and your bullshit. I can drown you right out and shame you the same way you have shamed other people. I can shame you the same way for hating liberty, for hating freedom. I can shut you down the same way. And that's what we need to start doing, pushing all the way back, not just a little bit, pushing all the way back, peel the whole lemon back on them. Because the one thing they've never faced is true force of defending ideas. People spout talking points and push on talking points, but they never seen the full blunt force of someone pushing their idea on them as they have pushed upon others. This is how we take this country back and get rid of all this collectivist, anti-liberty nonsense. With that being said, I hope everybody enjoyed this episode of Chasing Life, Liberty, Minarchy. Make sure you have shared, subscribed, all that good stuff. You know, all the button clicky thingies, all that good stuff. And make sure that you defend liberty at all cost. With that being said, remember, love your neighbors, love your family, but ultimately love yourself. Until next time, y'all. Peace and love.